Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hello, I'm Stephen Willis, host of the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, and I am joined by Mike Detillier on the phone to talk about all things, honestly, Ole Miss football, and maybe we might get into a little bit of the NIL discussion as well. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Appreciate you having me on.
Man, I'm just glad to have you because, listen, I spent 10 years working at rivals.com, so I understand player evaluation a little bit, or at least I should say I understand it just enough to get myself in trouble. But I do think I'm smart in one simple way is I'm willing to listen to other perspectives in any particular situation. So that way I ended up looking better than I probably am, if that makes sense. Is that about right, Mike?
Yeah, I think you learn along the way. I've done this. Now I'm dating myself now, but it's 38 years. And so it's been a few years for me. And every year you learn a little something, and you have to adapt and change because the players are changing. Some body types, what you're looking for at certain positions. I had this long conversation with someone yesterday about the linebacker spot. Okay, years ago when I first got into it, you were looking for this 6'3", 6'4" guy who was 240, was the big run stuffer. He played upfield. Today, those guys are rare. What you're looking for is that probably 6'1.5" guy who's 225, who can drop back in coverage, who can run the field better east-west. It's a different world. And if you don't adapt to that, then you're stuck in neutral and you die in the waters. And so I always think that is part of scouting and evaluation is just like looking at college teams. Things change from year to year because the players change, the systems change. What doesn't change is two spots. You got to have great quarterback play, and you got to win in the trenches. That sort of thing doesn't change, but player types and evaluations of what you're looking for, it's much smaller defensive linemen today on the edge than there's ever been in my 38 years doing this. Much smaller. They're different looks. You go and adapt each and every year to what you're looking at. And in this ever-changing world of college football or college athletics, things change not day to day, almost hour to hour, because you're not real sure about players, coaches. It's a commuter world of both coaches and players today.
Speaking of quarterbacks, since you brought it up, we did get to see the jump that always seems to happen with a Lane Kiffin quarterback in Jaxson Dart from year one to year two. But we are about to get the rarest of animals, and that is a year three Lane Kiffin quarterback. What are your expectations for Jaxson Dart in year three, and how do you think he might look a little bit different than even what we've seen so far?
Well, one, right off the bat, he's got the size you're looking for. He's got a real strong arm. He's mobile. He can run with the football, and he can also buy time with his feet. I thought in year one, he was a bit of an aimer as a passer. Last year, you saw he became more confident in what he was being asked to do. His rapport with his receivers were better. And just the confidence in him overall changed from year one to year two. Now here becomes the critical point, and I feel this way in every business. You can have talent, you can have a certain skill set, consistency. Okay, do you want to go to work each and every day and have a boss or a coworker who's off the charts? One day they sky high, the next day they in the valley. Every day it's a roller coaster. What you saw in Jaxson last year was he put together more consistency than he did first year. Now, can he take that to another level? Because if he can, then Ole Miss becomes not only a contender in the SEC, they become a national contender. That's how much a quarterback means to a football team. Listen, I saw what Joe Burrow did at LSU, what Jaden Daniels did here at LSU. That particular part of consistency, I think, is the key when you're going to come back and play another year, because he could have opted out early to the NFL, and he didn't. So you want to win up front, and I think certainly jumping into the portal to get, what is it, four that I can remember, offensive linemen, I think is a key. Big key, too, is Trey Harris coming back. I saw Trey, when he was at Como High School, he was an option quarterback. And there were so many receivers in the state of Louisiana because he was being projected either as a wideout or maybe a cornerback. But I knew he was going to be an offensive player. He just had certain traits about him. But LSU didn't offer. He goes to Louisiana Tech, and he was a good player there. When I saw he signed on with Ole Miss, perfect. That's what you wanted. You wanted to go to a team that was going to get him the football and he could haul ass downfield with it after the catch, because that's what he does best. Man, with the ball in his hands, he's got special traits. So I think with all that being said, I think Jaxson, if he can stay healthy, he puts Ole Miss in, certainly Georgia. They are who they are. But I think the battle is who's going to be the number 2 team in the SEC this year. And Ole Miss is in that conversation. I don't ever remember in my 38 years, maybe other than Eli's final year, that they're part of that conversation when you're talking about preseason, looking at some of the top 6 to 8 teams in the country. Ole Miss is in that conversation. Okay, they're in that conversation because I've had them with different people that I'll write for or do shows with. So, man, Jaxson Dart's a big key, and I just like the way he handled the pressure of things late, and his consistency as a passer was outstanding last year. I think it'll get even better this year, but he brings that threat that he can take off running with the football. And in this world, nothing drives defensive coordinators and coaches up the wall more than that trait. That guy that can take off and make something happen with it. Okay, you got a 3rd and 7, and you got everybody covered. All of a sudden, okay, you got 9 yards, 10 yards, another first down, and I'm staying on the field. So it's and I got high hopes for Ole Miss this year. I think they will be a national contender, and I think legit in that first year of those 12-team playoffs, they're going to be in there.
You have a situation, you just talking about that. I think it was the last play of the 3rd quarter against LSU this year for Ole Miss, to where they had Ole Miss kind of covered up. Jaxson Dart took off running. It was like a 30-yard run down the field. He hurdled over a man, and that stadium popped at a level where I was like, Ole Miss is about to win this football game.
When I saw that play, though I'd seen it so many times this year from a lousy LSU defense, I knew LSU was going to lose that day. Because no matter what it was going to come down to which quarterback had the football in his hands last. And you think about how it ended. Jaden Daniels hits Chris Hilton in the end zone in a bad spot, right between his hands, and he drops it. I mean, he got hit on the play and all, but still, if you didn't have a dog in the hunt to watch that game and you loved offense and you walked away from that not happy, something's wrong with you. Now, if you're a defensive person, you come away with that a little disappointed. But offensively, to watch Jaxson, to watch Jaden, it was something to see. And, for Ole Miss, I think now the big key is being able to take this to the next level with an experienced quarterback who can stretch a defense a lot of different ways, but winning more in the trenches. Because I think, if you probably would know more about it than me, that has maybe been the question mark of how good can they be on the defensive side of football. And it's not about making stops every time someone has the ball. The rules are set up for you to score today, but it's about getting off the field on third down. Pressure breaks the football pipe, being able to get pressure up front on a quarterback and make him uncomfortable. And maybe you've got that now with a couple of transfer guys, certainly with Princely from Florida, who I thought was their best defensive player a year ago, and Walter Nolen, who comes in, and he got a box full of press clippings. Now let's see, can he take that and be a more productive player? He certainly will get that opportunity at Ole Miss. Again, I go back to it. I don't remember, other than Eli's final year at Ole Miss, this much expectations from so many from a Rebel football team.
Yeah, it's absolutely nuts to think about. And looking at the transfers, I did a video a couple of days ago on the most impactful transfers, and everybody's going around the Ole Miss sphere and they just think Walter Nolan. That's the name you hear. And I think the most impactful transfer is going to be Princely Umanmielen.
No question.
Yeah,
man. He can get off the snap, because I watched him, because I thought he might come out early for the draft. Mm-hmm. Okay. It's his takeoff and his ability to set up a move and a counter move. He does that very well. And so he's got length, he's got speed, his closing ability to the quarterback is very good. And you saw teams starting about mid-season with Florida to chip him, either with a running back or a tight end. That deal is, man, I know who's the best player front seven-wise. I got to take care. I got to do something to slow him down. And I agree with you on Princely. I think as an impact guy, because of his experience, because of his skills, I think he may be the guy. Now, Walter came in certainly with all the credentials, but now he's got to be a more productive player. Princely, people say, oh, well, he didn't put up that great of stats. What? Then you didn't watch Florida play. I know going into the LSU game, LSU coaches were, man, there's one guy we better block, and that's Princely. And so I think you're absolutely right on him. I think he's the guy that can come in day one. Hey, I'm taking over. And he gives you an edge pass rush. You haven't had it in a little while from a big man.
Yeah, and like I said, Walter Nolan's probably the most important player that Ole Miss signed. So don't hear anybody that's listening to this think that I'm disparaging him in any way. But Princely's he's a game wrecker. He's a person that if you let him, he will take over and control what you can do offensively from the edge.
Yeah, and I think with so much attention on Princely, what that will do is open up things in the middle for Walter. It'll open that up. Okay, now I got to beat one-on-one. And I think he's got the ability to do so. His ceiling is higher than Princely's, potentially. Now, he's just got to go out and do it. And I think for a quarterback, because I deal with them a lot, they'll all tell you the same thing. The worst type of pressure you get is right up the middle. They don't like it because it's right in their face. You can't step up in the pocket to make a throw. They take away your launch pad. So once that's blown up, you got two choices. Either to start going backwards or start moving east and west. And either way is not good most of the time. So, man, to get both of them is a big-time catch and eye-opening for other teams in the SEC, that both of them would end up at Ole Miss. I think on December 1st, and if I'd have told you Nolan and Princely would be available, I don't think anybody would have guessed both of them would have been at Ole Miss.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the thing that I tell people all the time, that it's not just those two players. It's that you're returning the number one and the number two options off of your defense from last year. And they just became the number 3 and the number 4 on the D line.
Yeah.
And
And I agree with that. The other part too, and I think a lot of people, maybe they weren't super high on what Pete Golding could do. But I tell this to people all the time. You know, Pete being at Alabama, do you think if he was making the calls Nick Saban didn't want, that Nick would have kept him all those years? Come on. I've been around Nick when he was here. Man, look, you're not doing what he wants you to do. Hey, it's been a pleasure. Goodbye. No, Pete was doing what Nick wanted him to do. Either that or Nick would have said adios to him. I think the Pete Golding effect, you saw it last year. I really like the scheme that he runs. Now, players always make you a lot smarter than you are as a coach. But I think Pete did a really good job in year one. And now everybody's sort of accustomed to what he wants to run and kind of where you need to be. And then you can go out and get a couple of experienced players. Recruiting's great. And, you got to win in that area. But how many 18-year-olds come in here and make an impact as a true freshman, as a front seven guy? Come on. See, you've been doing this a long time. So have I. I can probably count them on two hands. Guys that they don't look like 18, 19-year-olds, and they don't play like that. So to get two experienced guys is huge. And I feel the same way about offensive linemen. You're at, and it does happen more there than defensive line. And we saw it a couple years back. Ole Miss had a couple freshman linemen. We saw LSU had a couple of freshman offensive linemen, and Campbell and Jones. So those things happen more often than defensive linemen.
yeah, absolutely. And, before I let you out of here, I think Ole Miss is going to go to Baton Rouge this year. And I love the Ole Miss LSU game more than any other game on the schedule. The Egg Bowl's great, all of that stuff. I love the Ole Miss LSU game because when Ole Miss is good, that game is special and it's different. And every time, and let's see, 2 times in the last decade, Ole Miss has gone into Tiger Stadium undefeated and left with a loss. The odds are that they're going to be going down that road again. I expect that atmosphere in Tiger Stadium to again just be next level.
Yeah, and if you're a certain age, your dislike for Ole Miss here in Louisiana is higher than it is for Alabama. Now it's close, but if you're a certain age, because people remember back maybe when they were kids and they saw, Johnny Vaught, Paul Dietzel, or Coach Vaught up against Charlie McClendon, and you grew up in that with that LSU Ole Miss deal. But with Lane, there are a lot of LSU people that, man, they secretly really love Lane. I'm gonna be honest with you. It's not the dislike that they have for Saban. They love Lane because he's sort of a stick the middle finger at you. I'm going to show you how good I am. I think the misperception with Lane in a lot of quarters, especially not so much in the South, but if you do shows out West or in the Midwest or in the Northeast, is that Lane is this pass happy coach. Realize he runs the football more than he throws it. Okay. But you say that and people are, that's hard to believe. And then they look at the stats. Whoa, they really run the football a lot. Okay. Well, we know that. But for a lot of people outside the area, they don't realize how big the running game is for Lane. And Lane is one of these type coaches that he sets up his passing game through the running game. I think in a lot of cases, that's what he does. So I'm interested to see in the spring of how well the offensive line gels. It's the most injured spot on a football team, college and pros. I've done the studies on it. Tackles, guards, centers, they get hurt more than any other spot on the football field. And so if you're weak there, that's when things start to break down. And as much as we talked today about Princely and Walter Nolan, to be able to come up with the two offensive linemen from Washington, because, Kalepo and Bulow, both those guys, they can come in here and look where they played. Look the success they had with that football team. And then, you bring in, a couple other guys, Diego Pounds from North Carolina, Jerquan Scott from Southern Miss. So you got people with experience, and it's finding the right five, but also building up depth. Because, Stephen, I'm telling you, that's where you're going to have injuries, is along that offensive line. And I see what's happening here at LSU. They didn't have it under Coach O. They really didn't have that depth there. What Brian's doing, he's building up talent and talent depth. And I think that's what happens here. When you can go into the portal and get four guys that experience and size, they understand what they have to do, and it builds up your talent level and your talent depth. Because you can find the receiver, you can find the running back. They may not be as good as somebody you once had, but man, in the trenches, if you lose in there, you ain't winning squat, nothing. If you're talking about taking a team to the next level, and I think that is the expectations for Ole Miss this year. It's not only getting to 9 or 10 wins, it's beyond that. It's being able to get into that final 12 and winning playoff games, because that's where depth, I think, is going to come into play more than we've ever seen it. Because once you get into those series, you're going to have people either banged up or injured, not playing. So you got to be able to build up depth along that offensive and defensive line. And the other part, too, would be in the secondary. I think that's another spot where, well, just years ago when I first started doing this, I got two good starting corners, two good safeties. Okay, four guys, maybe got one other guy he's pretty good. Today, you better have not only two corners, you better have four that can play, because they spread you out three. And what happens? Somebody gets hurt. It's same way at safety. You'd always sort of look for the run defender now. Man, if I know that guy can only play the run well, I'm throwing the ball deep on him each and every play. So that's where, you come up with a couple of guys in the portal. I know a lot about Trey Amos. He's a Louisiana guy, went to Catholic high school in New Iberia, started out at University of Louisiana, went to Alabama. And being able to get him, he brings you some versatility and some size, in the secondary. So I'm interested in how all this works out in the spring, but more up front, because that's where you can really make hay. Because if you can win up front, you don't have to have what Quinshawn did was fantastic at Ole Miss, but you don't have to have a star back. You can have a good back, and he can come in and really help you out. But winning up front, paramount. Most people couldn't tell you who the running back was at Oregon or Washington, and look how good they were. They know maybe Blake with Michigan, but again, it is all about winning up front, and I think that's the key here for Ole Miss to take their football program to the next level, is building up front in the trenches, offensive, defensive line.
Yeah, and you mentioned Trey Amos and him transferring from Louisiana to Alabama, and anybody that has followed football for any period of time knows that defensive back room at Alabama was Nick Saban's baby, and you weren't going on that campus unless you could play.
Yeah, and he was a guy I know LSU really tried to land a year ago in the transfer portal, and he decided to go to Alabama. my thing would have been, I understand you going to Alabama because of the fact, Nick's developed all these top defensive secondary people for the NFL. But if you wanted a place to start right away, LSU had a spot for you. I can tell you that. So for him to go to Ole Miss, and I knew Ole Miss was in the mix with him, and talking to a couple of his coaches in high school, that I think that's a pickup that comes in, maybe not the headliner, but he could play a big part in their secondary this year. Yeah. Really could. I liked what I saw of him at University of Louisiana, where he was a really good player there. He didn't get an opportunity, but the two cornerbacks that Alabama have, they're going to both go in round one of the draft. So it's going to be hard to break into that secondary. I get that totally, but I think he quietly may be a very, very good football player. The other guy is Deion Smith. Mm-hmm. Because I remember when he came out, he was an early commitment to LSU. And then, that sort of tailed off and he decommitted, threw it back open. He ends up at Holmes Community College. Man, he's another guy like Trey that you want the ball in his hands because he's got some skill set of running with the football, that yak that, we talk about yardage after a catch, that you can't teach that. Either you got it or you don't. And when you have a quarterback like Jaxson, I think that, he's got an opportunity to see a lot of playing time and quickly, just because of what Ole Miss does to kind of string you out, use a lot of receivers. But, the biggest addition, and we talk about it, and I sort of figured Jaxson would come back. But getting Trey Harris to come back, man. You talk about you've landed a big there, because Trey coming back for another season, that connection between Jaxson and Trey is special. They kind of have ESP with one another, knowing where to be on the field, knowing how he runs a route, knowing what Jackson's going to do when he's on the move, coming back to the quarterback. A lot of times you see that with receivers because they're not used to it. Once a quarterback starts to bail, they continue to run up the field. No, and a lot of times you got to come back to your quarterback. Give him that spot to get rid of the football. But, man, it's going to be an interesting SEC season because the shadow of Nick Saban's not there. And I think Kalen DeBoer is a tremendous coach. But, man, that's some big moccasins. 10 wins, 11 wins, that ain't going to be enough, for Alabama fans. They want to win the national title. So we get it with Georgia. But then after that, I think you can make a pretty strong argument for Ole Miss. Really, really a strong argument that they could be the number 2 team in the SEC.
Yeah, and I always joke about the Kalen DeBoer hires. Like, somebody had to be Ray Perkins in this situation.
Well, man, I got a lot of stories about Ray, but my thing with that, Kalen won big, and everywhere he's been, he's won. My comparison to Caleb, and not personality-wise, is similar to Dennis Erickson. I remember, they went through all these coaching changes at Miami, and Howard Schnellenberger leaves, and he really built the program. And then Jimmy Johnson comes in, and he elevates the program to Mount Everest. When they brought in Dennis Erickson, people were, Dennis Erickson, where the hell he's been coaching? But look at the success. He won 2 national titles at Miami before he took off, and he went to the NFL. And then they brought in Butch, and Butch won big there too. So, but it's going to be difficult. Alabama still has a lot of talent. I think that the key there is you lost some big-time pieces on defense. How well you can rebuild off the edge with Braswell and no Dallas Turner. And also, I think in the conversation for top quarterbacks in the SEC, and we've talked so much about Jaxson, is certainly what Carson has done at Georgia. but Milroe, how he can take his game to the next level. So it's going to be a very interesting season because the specter of Nick is not there. And I think some teams were intimidated. I know even in talking to Pete Jenkins, he's like, Mike, I'm telling you, I think some teams were intimidated with Nick before they hit the field. You know, it was tight in a lot of different areas because you knew that unless you brought your A game as a coach, you had no shot, none.
Yeah, Saban was in Lane's head. I'm convinced of that.
I think you're right. I think you're right.
So thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Mike Detillier, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's been awesome. And I just can't wait to listen to all this again because I just like hearing your voice, man.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Anytime. Just give me a ring.
Will do. Thank you.